Welcome, everyone. So, I'm going to talk about a topic regarding spiritual awakening that many of you may not be aware of. Some of you may be all too aware of. But there is a tendency for spiritual awakening to get much more physical as time goes on, as progression happens on the path. So let's talk about why that is. I will say that spiritual awakening or not, where most people are, I would say probably 97% of people are, is working within the context of their childhood beliefs and wounding patterns. So, not only traumas or emotional experiences that happen to them in their childhood and their formative years and the sort of cause and effect of what type of person that made them, but also on a belief and sort of more structural identity level. We construct what we believe the world is. Um, we believe ourselves to be, what we believe people to be like, what we believe even in an existential capacity when we are quite young due to the circumstances and beliefs of our childhood home and of our community. And so I would say that when people are spiritually awakening, what tends to come up first for people are the traumas, emotions, experiences, particularly of victimhood for people to work through. And so these are very emotional. They're also mental belief structures, thought structures, all of that sort of stuff. If we are looking at energy work, at energies within the body, our beliefs, our mental energies, and our emotional experiences, many of them are kind of lighter or more to the surface or kind of a bit below the surface. So they're kind of light to moderate energies. They're also more at the surface level of our being. So, in simple terms, what does this mean? It means that the stuff that first comes up for people during spiritual awakening to resolve is all of that childhood and this lifetime stuff because it is on the surface, it is present. And also, there doesn't need to be a significant deconstruction of identity. This is what the deeper layers are about core experiences, core identity, core beliefs. Um, and those are hard to muddle our way through. It is one thing to heal childhood, stuff which is quite important, childhood wounding, childhood patterns, and the beliefs that ensued from that, in which we were harmed by the world. We were harmed by other people. Through that, we take on identity of being the victim. And it is tremendous. Anybody who's willing to work on that and look at that, it really can create massive shifts in consciousness and identity. And most significantly, the stopping of repeating of loops, the kind of cause and effect that happens from what we learn in childhood about ourselves and about the world, and how we are repeating that in adulthood, in our work, in our relationships, in our how we interact with others, what sort of pain and suffering and emotional reactivity we have to others, the projections, our own unhealed stuff we put onto others, all of that is really, really significant work. And there are far too many people that cannot or are not in a place to be willing to look at that sort of stuff and work through it. And so during the first phase of spiritual awakening, people tend to look at this stuff and work on it because it is very present, very at the surface. Um, and it also needs to be worked through to get to deeper or denser energies. And so those deeper or denser energies are going to be kind of the heavier emotions. Um, we all have experiences of this world in which we were harmed, in which we, you know, were made to feel not great about who we are, about what we can accomplish in this world. And some of those become a core aspect of our identity. I would say that the best way to describe this, how I describe this to my clients, is that picture yourself as the protagonist in a novel. How would you be described in the first paragraph or two? And that description really shows your core wounds, your core identity that has been formed from those wounds, essentially how you carry yourself in this world. And those energies are a bit denser. And so somebody who is spiritually awakening will then go towards those core wounds. And this is a bit more difficult for people because they are heavier energies. And also deconstructing these, releasing these core wounds results in shifts in identity. Basically, the description of that protagonist would change. And most of us are looking for this, but actually to achieve it, to believe we can achieve it, and to shift those energies in our bodies, to have the know-how or to find the correct people to help us to do that, that's a lot to ask of somebody. But the good news about spiritual awakening is that if somebody is truly going through a spiritual awakening process, it will lead them into further and further terrain. And so the only question is if the person will answer that call of action by looking towards what is coming up, or if they sort of shove it back down a bit. So I will say that, again, I'll go back to this 97% number because most people are in a place of healing their childhood wounds or, kind of being um, awakening or not, kind of in a place of experiencing the cause and effect of them. And so an interesting thing happens, and this really gets to the heart of the question of why spiritual awakening becomes more physical, is that there is a place where somebody moves beyond story. And typically what happens is that the person goes into pure emotion. They will feel emotions in an embodied way, but there isn't necessarily a story or even images that go with it. There is just a felt feeling, um, a feeling within the body, I guess I should say, and a physical response from the body of it releasing. There is no longer a need to assign meaning to it, or what may come up are more like single words or themes or a recognition like, oh yeah, this is early childhood pre-verbal stuff, or this is another lifetime stuff, or this is just heavy energy, doesn't really need a title or a topic, that sort of thing. And it's at this point that people start to move into a space of pure feeling, as well as a space of more dense physical clearing and healing. So I will say that there are some paths of spiritual awakening, like Kundalini awakening, that always include a physical element. At first, this may be sort of shaking, nervous system releasing, that sort of stuff, even spontaneous movements. And all of these movements and shaking are to release, to get the body in positions where it can release through the channels, to get the nervous system to release prior stress and trauma, and get to a healthier state, to move out of fight, flight, freeze, all of that sort of stuff. And so this does happen for some people earlier on the path. I always say when I create maps like this is that the map is not the territory. This is a famous quote that is not my own. But basically what this means is that I am suggesting the tendency of progression rather than something that is going to happen linearly. Somebody may dip back and forth as necessary. Somebody may be processing emotions without words, without need to come up with story, and then all of a sudden something comes up with them that needs context, needs a narrative in order to heal. And so if we were to look at this question simply and clearly, why does spiritual awakening become more physical? It is due to the dense layering of energies in the body, in which in spiritual awakening, what will tend to move first through the body are energies that are much more at the surface and much more movable, that you have much more access to. For example, it might be more difficult to ask somebody at the beginning of their path to work through something that they cannot consciously recall, like an ancestral healing or maybe even something before the age of 6. Um, but it is helpful for them to work through, a bad relationship at age 20 or something that happened to them at their birthday party when they were 10 or in school or something like that. And so there's a reason why we go to those places first, not only because we can consciously recall them, but they are the first things that come up because they are kind of the last things that are in our system, and they are the least dense energetically. Um, and so we can look at the channels of our body sort of as blocked pipes. And a stream starts to go through those pipes, which is consciousness. And what gets sort of kicked up by that stream is, part of the imagery, but the gunk and the blockage and the dirt and the stuff that isn't so packed in, it isn't so dense, it has been more recent. If we get deeper and deeper, we get to experiences that we don't like to look at, that are harder to work on because they require some deconstruction of personal identity, or looking very clearly and specifically at areas in which we might have been the persecutor or created harm rather than be the victim. And also just deconstruction of our identity overall is difficult because that identity is also contingent upon what we think of people, what our spiritual orientation is, what we think of the cosmos, and how connected we are on a basic level. Spiritual awakening, if we let it, gets us to greater and greater experiences of connection to ourselves, to one another, to the earth, to the sky, to the cosmos. And we have all of these belief structures, all of these experiences of pain and suffering and being harmed, and, things that we have learned along the way, beliefs, ignorances that have caused for us to shut down to all of our natural state, our natural awareness, which is that of connection, that of oneness. And so the later stages of spiritual awakening can be easier in some ways because there's not so much story, but they can be harder in other ways because you are asking somebody to let go of their sense of self, to let go of the physical density of their body and to expand into a recognition of being more than that, to move outside linear time, to really look at beliefs, to look at areas of separation, to look at labels, all of that sort of stuff that are keeping people separated or in a box or at a point where they are dehumanizing others or cannot look at another person or group and experience empathy and openness rather than hatred, or the projection of our own suffering onto convenient targets, which is where a lot of people who are awakening or not are, especially at this time in our history with the internet and everything. Um, it is so convenient for people to just take all of their pain and externalize it onto convenient targets rather than take ownership of it. But that aside, somebody can get to the point with spiritual awakening where they go deeper and deeper into energies. And what is our densest energy? It is our physical body. And so somebody who has, kind of been working through their identity structure, they've experienced likely many stages of oneness, of peace, of a lack of conflict within the self and with others, a blossoming of grace, experiences of oneness, all of that sort of stuff. What they will tend to experience are more physical pains and more movement and a feeling of denser energies moving through the system. And this is because if we go back to that pipe analogy, the consciousness flowing through is like that water flowing through the pipe. What is going to release first is the stuff that can release first, the stuff from this lifetime, the emotions. Then it gets stuff that might be caked on a bit more, that's a bit denser, deeper emotions, times we've been the persecutor, core identity stuff, how we see reality, how we separate from it. And then it finally gets to the densest energies, which have to do with our physicality, with letting go of our self overall. This is I, this is me, separate from the rest of reality. And that sort of stuff is very dense. It is very bone oriented. It is very kind of the very caked on old stuff in that pipe. And so when people experience this, they're typically well past, kind of needing to relive and experience their childhood pain. They've worked through all the, or a bunch of the persecutor stuff. They are feeling things in a deep emotional way, but also very much a structural way in which the body may move, or they may just feel kind of these structural blocks in their system that don't have story. They don't even necessarily have emotion anymore. They just kind of are. And if somebody is willing to sit with those structural, physical, dense energies without a need for story, without a need to do anything, but just simply sit with them and feel with them, what will happen is that they will begin to release, and the rest of that pipe, so to speak, can clear. I will add one caveat that sometimes people think that spiritual awakening means that somebody, is never going to have any sort of physical, emotional, spiritual health difficulties overall. That very much is not true, but things can considerably shift in the body at this level for sure. And that can mean greater health or a greater awareness of the physical body and tending to health, um, and those sorts of things. So I hope that this has been helpful. Feel free to share any needs for clarity, or just your thoughts below.